Welcome back to the first Industry Workshop 2022. Now, with the threat of climate change posing mounting challenges on energy demand, food supplies, economies, and biodiversity, there is an urgent need to mitigate the adverse effects of global warming with technology and R&D. Now, although technological advancements and breakthroughs are supporting sustainability efforts and bringing us closer to goals of zero waste and circular economies, there's still much work and research needed to achieve these goals in an increasingly resource constrained world, especially if we want to create healthcare systems that are sustainable while improving public health, or future buildings and cities that are energy efficient, or even food supplies that are resilient to climate change. Now, recognizing that sustainability is key to the ever changing global landscape, the Singapore University of Technology and Design believes in addressing sustainability as a series of interlinked challenges that are not only solvable but opportunities for innovation, growth, and a more abundant and joyful future. Now, the SUTD Sustainability Plan articulates SUTD's core vision of being the foremost university in the world for technology and design education and research to offer a unique future forward approach to making sustainable change. Now, during our panel discussion today, distinguished forum panelists will discuss the development and utilization of smart technologies to build a resilient and sustainable future, and how to overcome challenges brought about by climate change, something that is further compounded by black swan events like the COVID-19 pandemic. And joining us today for our discussion are, first of all, Erwin Viray, Chief Sustainability Officer and Professor, Architecture and Sustainable Design Pillar, SUTD. Now, Erwin currently leads the sustainability initiatives in SUTD. Prior to his current role, he was the head of Architecture and Sustainable Design Pillar from May 2016 to July 2021. Now, Erwin was Global Excellence Professor at Kyoto Institute of Technology and head of the Graduate School of Architecture and Design from 2012 to 2016. He's also the Chief Communications Officer for Kyoto Design Lab. Now, he served as member of the board of Toto Gallery Ma in Tokyo and member of Advisory Council for the Barcelona Institute of Architecture. Now, Erwin is an award ambassador, for the Wholesome Awards in Asia Pacific and served as a jury chair and member of various prominent architecture awards in the region. Erwin has also been an editor of the influential magazine A Plus U, or Architecture plus Urbanism, since 1996. Thank you so much for joining us. And also joining us at this panel is Eugene Wee, Director, Enterprise Division, A Star. Now, Eugene leads A Star's Venture and Creation Growth Division, and that's a team that actively seeks to expand the base of innovative enterprises by leveraging technologies and capabilities in A Star to create innovative products, services, and competitive businesses in Singapore. Now, prior to his current appointment, Eugene led Accelerate Venture Creation Private Limited, a wholly owned subsidiary of A Star. He had also held roles in corporate governance, policy, and business development at Accelerate, the marketing and commercialization arm of A Star. Eugene also previously held offices at A Star, including Director of its Organizational Excellence Division and Deputy Director of Policy and Planning. Now, before he joined the A Star family, Eugene had come from a varied background which spanned consultancy and market intelligence for companies such as IDC and IBM. Also joining us today is Harjeet Singh Rekhi, General Manager, WW Digital Cities at Dell Technologies. Now, he leads the go to market and sales for Dell Technologies' Global Digital Cities team. Now, in his role, he serves numerous customers globally, helping them in their complex transformation journey. Harjeet works cross functionally with Dell Technologies to assemble pursuit teams, collaborating with customer organizations to fulfill their expectations. Now, Harjeet has been with Dell for more than a decade, witnessing the organization transform into an end to end solutions provider. He is a key member of the leadership team, having served various roles in sales, solutioning, and marketing. Harjeet's career spans financial services, consumer durables, automobiles, telecoms, and IT. He's been a veteran of the ICT industry, having spent over 2 decades with iconic companies Motorola and Dell Technologies. Now, the other person joining our panel today is Selina Seah. Selina Seah is Adjunct Assistant Professor and Assistant Chief Executive Officer Transformation, Changi General Hospital. Now, Selina has assumed concurrent roles as Assistant Chief Executive Officer, Changi General Hospital, and the development lead for a new regional health campus to serve the growing needs in the eastern part of Singapore, where she provides leadership and direction for care transformation, looking at developing enablers in infrastructure, technology, and innovations. She is also the director for the Center of Healthcare Assistive Robotics and Technology, or CHART, which provides oversight for the Smart Systems Program Office at Ministry of Health to drive the adoption of robotics and assistive technology and evaluate its impact. Now, with an eye on Singapore's future healthcare landscape, she's also working on strategic partnerships as deputy chair at the Singh Health Duke NUS's Academic Medicine Innovation Institute. Now, last but certainly not least, we also have with us Wong Suan, founder and managing director, ONEBlue Advisory LLP. Now, Mr. Wong has more than 40 years of experience in water energy nexus and sustainable urban solutions, with senior management position in both private and public sectors. Now, Mr. Wong is a registered professional engineer, a senior member of Institute of Engineers of Singapore. He also attended Advanced Management Program at Harvard Business School. He established OneBlue Advisory LLP in 2011 and is the executive advisory of ILO of NUS Enterprise, focusing in translation and commercialization, IP management, advice and mentor startup, spin-off companies. Now, between 2015 to 2020, he was also the European Union Business Avenue's Singapore industry expert for industrial sector related to green energy, environment, and water. Now, Mr. Wong is also a member of the Singapore University of Technology and Design Steering Committee for NSOE. In early 2020, he was invited to be a member of the Energy Market Authority's Board Committee on Energy Reliability and Technology. Thank you so much to our wonderful panelists for joining us today. Now, we're going to start off with the first question without further ado. And this question is: how can technology address the exponential need for energy and natural resources to drive economic growth? Maybe the first person who can answer this would be Wong Suan. Suan, what are your thoughts on this?
Hi, good morning, all. Thank you for having me in the panel. Be happy to share some of my view. Uh, to me, I would like to look at the so-called the water and energy nexus and concentrating about so-called the technology part of it. Now, water is life, energy is also an essential utility. I would like to start with the water. Now, to ensure uh, there are sufficient growth in the technology to support sustainable water treatments, a lot of the focus, in my view, will be in the membrane technology, where it will drive the usage of energy down to a lowest possible level. Give example on the membrane technology, where we can now in the desalination plant bring the consumption of 4 kilowatt unit down to 2 kilowatt unit at the system level. So what does it mean? Can the technology continue to address so-called the need of energy in treatment of water? The answer is yes. So we are looking at various technology pushing down the energy consumption further into biomimetic and things like that. As you move on to the energy side, then you will find that everybody is talking about deployment of solar energy. To me, there is still room to improve the efficiency of solar panel. Now we're looking at the best panel in the market now. They are looking at, I think, maximum 22% efficiency. Now, I think certainly through some research and material and system design, then you should able to push it to say 25. So if you link the two together, the water and energy together, then we may lead to the other one on the natural resources, where the technology should able to push, where we can extract more difficult resource, extract more resources from difficult site like deep sea and for natural gas and things like that. That's my thought. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Toon Suan. And of course, we'd also like to hear from Harjeet. Rekhi, Harjeet, what are your thoughts on this? How can technology address the exponential need for energy and natural resources to drive economic growth?
Yeah, thank you, Wayne. Thank you for inviting me and the fellow panelists to talk about, sustainability and climate change. I think increasingly being described as an existential threat to our planet. Clearly, there are several areas in which one could look at from a technology perspective. I think it was just referred to a short while ago about energy, and clearly some of the areas in which technology is making a lot of headway and will continue to see that over this decade is in the area of battery technologies, sort of not just reducing the cost, but reducing the weight and improving the efficiency of that. Green hydrogen is another area that is increasingly becoming very critical. Smart agriculture and vertical farming, especially for food security, and ensuring that we can, as a society, ensure that we use much less resources to grow more food. Remember, a lot of the agricultural produce is now being used for alternative energy uses versus just for food requirements. And so that's sort of putting pressure as well. There's also technologies such as IoT and sensor technologies, along with smart metering, that is helping individuals like you and me manage our energy consumption in a far more efficient manner for redistribution of energy amongst commercial and residential users. And all of that is making the entire electric grid a lot more intelligent. But just to talk a little bit about some of the battery technology, I mean, in the last decade, we've seen the battery technology efficiency rise up. The cost has come down dramatically. And in this current decade, we expect to see that happening even a lot more. And so clearly, that is going to be an area that is going to make the most profound impact in the way technology can help in climate change. The changing electric grid is another area. For instance, the more electric vehicles are used, the lesser we require, hydrocarbons to power our transport networks. In fact, the electric grid is going to see the most profound changes over the next 10 years than it has seen in the last 100 years. And so that's going to have a dramatic impact as more and more electric utility producers, smaller producers like individuals, are going to contribute to the grid. The grid would then have to store that technology and then reuse it when it's most required. The third area is electric vehicles. And so the sooner we adapt and adopt that technology, the sooner we can get electric vehicle technology, not just in expensive cars, but in freight traffic, in trucks and buses, the sooner we can achieve peak demand in hydrocarbons. And so we can start to reduce our dependency on that very, very rapidly. And then finally, remote working. So we've seen that during COVID. We've clearly been, given a very clear demonstration of how technology can play a significant role in keeping the economy powered, in keeping people employed, but at the same time reducing the carbon footprint dramatically. And so, the more remote working technologies get better, the more organizations begin to adopt that as a way of life, the more we'll see the benefits to society at large.
Thank you so much, Harjeet, for that very, very comprehensive answer. So many insights over there. And I want to move on to talk about what we're having right now, which is the global COVID 19 pandemic. I wonder, how can we rethink and innovate in our sustainability efforts with COVID 19? Maybe, Selina, you might be able to share some insights on this.
Thank you. Thank you, Wayne. Greetings to the people of the future. Healthcare has been in a thrust of transformation, in part because the complex system is trying to grapple with the impact of aging, increase in chronic disease, whilst struggling with a population reduction, or more commonly known as the manpower crunch. So we have a supply increase and a supply decrease, but coupled with a demand increase. And COVID-19 actually gave us this to realize that whilst we rebuild our healthcare resilience, we need to take into account the environment, and even more so. And COVID-19 actually is a cloud with a silver lining, because first and foremost, we realize how much single-use disposables, such as the personal protective equipment, is burned on a daily basis because we need to fight an infectious disease. Are there other innovations that can allow us opportunity to look at reusables? And this is something that healthcare has been grappling for years. But with COVID-19, we realized how much we could help harm the environment, because we have to, at the same time, save lives. So this gives us a huge opportunity and impetus to look at reusable consumables. The other thing is the increase in clinical waste during the last 2.5 years. And this definitely gives us impetus to then think about how do we change our culture for consumption and procurement in order to look at increasing the recycling and products needs to be rethought and redesigned in order for us to achieve those goals. And we're not even talking about new functionalities. We're just looking at new materials or new ways of handling things which we have clinically proven to work. The other thing is we need to start thinking about building healthcare facilities that have the capability to deal with climate change in the beginning, rather than to find ways to cope with it. That is, how do we thermoregulate, how do we use all the smart technologies that were mentioned earlier to allow us to increase renewable energy using the footprint that we have, reuse consumables that we throw away, reduce energy, water consumption, for example. And all this requires us to deliberately design it from the start and deliberately think about how it would change consumer consumption and habits from the start. And this is really useful because today, when we talk about resiliency in healthcare, most people think about isolation rooms, expanding the emergency department, but there are actually a lot of opportunities for us to look at bringing in the environmental concern early.
Thank you so much, Selina, for that perspective, especially on healthcare and much more. Now, it's true that many industries really do have high carbon footprint, especially some of the bigger sectors. So, Harjeet, can you tell us, how do you think technology can provide a more sustainable future for industries with high carbon footprint?
Yeah, thanks, Wayne. Actually, the largest footprint is really not an industry. It's actually the cities we live in. And I wanted to share some facts with the SUTD community. Cities occupy a meager 4% of the Earth's landmass, yet consume close to 78% of the global energy generated, and while contributing 60% of greenhouse gas emissions. So the size and scale of the complexity of the cities we live in are extremely dramatic. Today, half of the world's population lives in cities, a number that is expected to grow to 70% by 2050. Now, let's do another statistic. The global population by then, which is by 2050, which is about 28 years from now, will be just shy of 10 billion people. 9.5, 9.7, I believe, is the estimate, which is 70% of that number is approximately 7 billion, which coincidentally is the exact number of souls on planet Earth today. What that really means is that in the next 2+ decades, the entire global population as it stands today is going to be living in cities. Now, that is the size and scale of the problem, and that is what we're seeing as being the biggest challenge for society to tackle. So clearly, the most important aspect that we need to address is how do we make our cities more sustainable? How do we ensure that the technology that we employ in not just designing cities, but also in terms of running cities, can deliver the sustainability goals, scope 1, 2, 3, for society at large. And so technology is helping design cities from grounds up as we speak, but also looking at how do we manage cities today. And the biggest contributor of carbon emissions within cities are buildings, which in turn contribute to 40% of greenhouse gas emissions. And so a simple use of technologies such as building information systems called BIM is an excellent way of providing real-time data on energy utilization, as well as solutions on predictive analytics or outcomes resulting from planned changes. So for example, better programming of elevators and escalators, huge consumers of energy. The HVAC system, how do you design that better? Can we simulate a 1 degree increase in temperature, and what does that do in terms of lowering the energy consumption of that enormous system? Letting people work from home for a few days, starting with adults with young children as an example. All of these are ways and means in which technology can play a central role in reducing the energy consumption of cities. But not just in terms of existing cities. We're also helping design brand new cities that are being built on the foundation of green. So for instance, we're working with one of the largest automotive companies in the world to design a brand new city on the foothills of Mount Fuji in Japan that will be completely run on hydrogen fuel cell technology. So the entire city would be powered by hydrogen fuel cells. And this is not fiction. This is real. This is happening as we speak. The city is being constructed. And clearly, this is the way that the new cities are challenging technology to deliver on the green promise. Another city in Saudi Arabia, a city called Neom, is being built as we speak on a $500 billion budget that will be fully green when it actually gets inhabited around 2030. Closer home, Nusantara, which is the proposed new capital of Indonesia, is expected to be built on green foundations. So clearly, The challenge for us as technology organizations is to be able to deliver on the promise of today's city needs as well as designing cities for the future. I spoke about transportation earlier, but wanted to speak a little bit more about that. Transportation is another sector where the full potential of what technology can bring to the table is being seen right in front of our eyes. So, the advent of electric vehicles, the advent of autonomous driving and self driving, that is will have the most profound change, not just in terms of sustainability, but also in terms of reducing road fatalities. So, reducing the number of people who unfortunately die or get injured as a result of road accidents. And so in the US, transportation accounts for just shy of 30% of total greenhouse gas emissions. So clearly, that's an industry that will benefit the most from technology infusion in electric vehicles. Like I said, not just in cars, but also in terms of public transportation, buses, as well as freight, last mile delivery vehicles, and so on and so forth. Finally, in terms of food, again, we spoke about that briefly a short while ago. How we grow our food is going to become an extremely important aspect, not just in terms of the water we use to grow our food, but also the amount of fertilizer we place into the soil, the herbicides that we place into the soil. All of that today is based on age-old practices. Technology is today being used to monitor the amount of fertilizer and herbicide that's going into and the amount of water that is being placed in farms. So we've been fortunate to work with a date farm in Egypt that reduced its water usage by 40%. And consider a date farm, there isn't day-to-day maintenance required to the extent of some of the other crops. The biggest variable cost for that farm is water. And so if you could reduce water, not only does the farm become a lot more efficient, but it also is a far more sustainable way of growing crops. And one last example, we're working with an organization in Asia that actually is providing close to 40,000 handheld devices that is going farm to farm, smaller farms, not large farm to farm, checking soil conditions, uploading that data into the cloud, and analyzing it and aggregating it and disseminating it back to farmers so that they can decide how much of input do they require to grow a successful crop. So technology is already playing a very, very important role, and we expect in the next decade or two this is going to be the most transformational coming of age of our technology solutions.
Thank you so much, Harjeet. That was once again so comprehensive, so many golden nuggets of info over there for us to chew on. And that leads me to our next question, and that is, are present technologies able to tackle imminent sustainability changes? And if not, what are the necessary advancements in technology necessary to overcome challenges from climate change and secure our water and energy, as well as our food? So I'd like to address this question to Toon Suan. What are your thoughts?
Thanks, Wayne. I think perhaps I would like to add in land also, because when we talk about food, energy, water, uh, in the Singapore's context, I think the land is also equally important issue. Now, I think it's a lot of this technology that we have deployed now, as mentioned by Mr. Singh earlier, on all these vertical farming, aquaculture, which link to land use, smaller footprint, and efficient use, so that will also reduce energy and carbon footprint. Now, are they adequate now? Are they good enough? I think the answer will be is adequate, but perhaps a lot more improvement. Look at the vertical farming of, say, well, I want to use vertical aquaculture. There is a multi-story high building in Kranji looking at aquaculture, raising fish in I think about 7 story. Um, my view is a lot more they can deploy on energy usage more efficiently through more usage of solar, plus perhaps in the countryside some wind energy, and then back to the water. How much can you recirculate the water without affecting your aqua, the fish farming grow? Well, so there's a need of technology to clean up the waste in the water more efficiently. So that is on probably a bit related to food, and the land use part of it, where, well, I think Mr. Singh mentioned about EV and things like that. Now, I probably will frame it as urban mobility. Uh, it's so very good to have the EV, which you need good battery technology. You just imagine the battery you use from in our handphone for in the 80 until now. The size have reduced, but the power density is definitely increased on a multiple fold. Now, vehicle to grid was also mentioned by Mr. Singh, meaning you are sending your extra power back to the grid. There's a few technology challenge, and I'm not sure. I think most of you will know. The more EV charger you have in the system, in our grid system, it actually mess up the power quality. Sometimes can be quite a big deal. Remember, in our country, there are a lot of high-tech wafer plant. We need very clean energy. So where do we go from here about power quality management? I think that is something I think the technology should ever to help. That's my view.
Thank you so much, Toon Suan. And now I'd like to come back to Harjeet with the same question. Are present technologies able to tackle imminent sustainability challenges? And if not, what are the necessary advancements in technology necessary to overcome challenges from climate change and secure our food, water, and energy?
Yeah, so I think I refer to my earlier response as well. But just to add to that, I think there are a couple of other areas that one can definitely look at. A fast evolving industry called carbon capture that essentially is trying to reverse some of the challenges that we're facing with greenhouse gas emissions. And so carbon capture is really about um, you know capturing those greenhouse gases, trapping the radiation in the atmosphere that would otherwise escape into space. So clearly, what some of the organizations are beginning to do, and it's early stages as yet, but this is going to be something that we will need to have a very good handle of over the next few years to be able to reverse some of the damage that's already been done. Um, we, you know, some of the statistics talk about greenhouse gases, of which carbon dioxide is the biggest culprit. Um, they have increased 50% since the industrial revolution began, and so clearly that's one of the causes for global warming. And by reducing the CO2 emissions is one area, but also recapturing some of that carbon in the air is an extremely important area. Again, early stages, but something that we're watching very closely in the technology space. There's also household energy efficiency, and in Singapore, we're one of the leaders in that space, using far more energy efficient labeled devices for the last several years, if not decades. We've had energy appliances being labeled in a industry wide, widely globally accepted labeling process. We've been using energy saving light bulbs. We've been using flow limiters in our plumbing, and so on and so forth. So we've really led the way, but I think over the next few years we'll see a lot more happening in that area. We now have a rollout of smart water meters. We already have smart electric meters, and that is essentially going to help individuals like you and me better plan our consumption patterns and reduce our individual carbon footprint. I would say that those are the two areas in addition to what's already been said.
Thank you so much, Harjeet, for adding on with those perspectives of how we can further secure our food, water, and energy. And moving on from that, I want to turn to healthcare. Now, can future health solutions contribute to sustainability development goals? Selina, what do you think?
Thank you. We have a really important goal, which is to ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all and for all people of all ages, and promoting equality in healthcare for all. So that in itself is a sustainable goal, because if we don't achieve that, then when we come to 2050 with the kind of population statistics that Harvey just mentioned, the disparity will get worse, and then it becomes unsustainable to provide healthcare to only the top 5-10% who can afford it. As such, future health solutions or digital health solutions is something that we need to think about really seriously. Now, on a very basic level, digital health solutions help us at least to reduce the amount of paper or the tonnage of paper being used currently in healthcare. For every patient that comes in outpatient and inpatient, and tonnage of paper. In many countries, like for example, even in the US, where the electronic health record is a very common tool that's used in every healthcare facility. But it is the big names. Many of the outpatient clinics still continue to use paper and pen. So as such, the question is if, for example, Kaiser Permanente, when they did a study, if they were to reduce the amount of paper used to provide care plans and to even have internal communication with between the multidisciplinary team, they can actually increase the carbon sequestered by thousands of acres of pine tree farms. So you can imagine, just the thing of reducing the need for more paper has a huge impact. Now, secondly, we also need to push ahead something which has been spoken about for 100 years, but has never really root until COVID-19, which is telemedicine. For areas that are geographically spread out, it is very easy to see the logic as compared to Singapore, where you can just run downstairs from your HDB block and there's probably a nearby GP. But having said that, there are still a lot of areas for us to work on, which includes specialist consult, multiple specialist consults that need to be done across different days in order to arrive at a diagnosis and a care plan and the appropriate treatment for our patient. We actually have a huge opportunity to continue to drive telemedicine in that. And telemedicine also allow us to reach out to perhaps areas in which people are finding mobility to be an issue. So therefore, future health solutions can play a huge part in allowing us to achieve sustainable goals. Other components include us being able to deliberately design for population health. And digital health solutions definitely can play a big role in nudging consumers in the right healthy lifestyles to pick up the correct lifestyle habits, to eat well, reduce sugar content, for example. And all this has a opportunity if we, for example, bring in the gaming motivation to allow people to understand what is important. The traditional way of just informing, passing somebody a pamphlet, it's not as useful anymore. And we should start looking at how social media, for example, has changed a lot of the way we worked and live. And can we also similarly do the same for encouraging healthier lifestyles? So I think there's a lot that we can do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Selina, for that wonderfully insightful answer on how the healthcare sector is continuing to contribute to the sustainability development goals. Moving on, I want to move on to the government sector, and I want to ask Toon Suan this. Are present government policies adequate in driving innovation to tackle climate change? Tun Suan, your thoughts.
Well, my quick answer would be adequate, but certainly government can do more. Now, in Singapore, the government take a lead in many things, including the innovation. The policy is a very important enabler for things to start from ground zero. I think some years ago when they start the RIEC funding, I remember the policy put down is what we call a tripartite home policy: home for business, home for innovation, and home for talent. All right. So Singapore is home for so many things, including innovation, which is very important to drive our new and future economy. Now, with this policy, what is a funding policy then? Right? You have the framework. Where is the money? Yeah, take a quick example. I think the current RAC 2025, we have something like 25 billion Sing dollar. That's a lot of money, 5 billion a year. Now, where are the focus of some of this fund? Okay, I think there are focus team like urban sustainable urban solution. What we talk a lot about today on energy, talk about food, land use, and all these things. Now, there are also money set aside to match new policy coming up or new initiative. I believe they are so-called white space or what you call the blue ocean. Example here be coastal protection. It's very hot and it's very important topic. Then we government and every one of us need to address immediately. It's a lot of study, but when can we move on that? I'll come to that later. Now, in the sustainable urban solution, that will create also what we call living lab in Singapore. What does it mean? Any innovation, you cannot just within Singapore. But I think more importantly is we don't do it in isolation. We need to connect to the world. So there are policy or incentive to bring in other new technology that can pilot test here, that can scale up here and grow and become a contributor to our economy. So that part is a very important as a living lab. Singapore is small, compact, and well connected. Not just infrastructure, but IoT. I think many panelists talk about IoT. We are a very good test bed, and we are a very, I must say, we are a very advanced city to test so many things. Okay, now, so what with all this good policy coming in and attracting innovation, bringing talent, of course, the pandemic has set back a little bit, but I think we are catching up very fast. There is an article, I think in Strict Time on the 18 May 18, talk about front load the climate change expenditure. Okay, I think it's written by two professors, meaning we have climate change challenge, it'll be there to stay. The conflict in Europe will go there one day, but the climate change will be here to stay for a long time. So there are policy, there are funding. So the question is, when do you start spending and how fast can you spend? This particular article in the Strata argue we should front load it, meaning we start it fast, we start it now. Anyway, we need those, so why don't we start? I thought that is a very interesting article, trigger a lot of thought. So that's my view that about policy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tun Swan. And on that note, we want to speak to Eugene from A-Star and ask this question. What research strategies should government agencies and research centers adopt in order to bring about these necessary technological advancements to accelerate innovation in the areas of sustainability? Eugene, your thoughts?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Wayne, for the question. And thank you to the first team for inviting me to be amidst this very illustrious panel. And I also like to thank Suan, who really set me up very nicely for this question when he talked about the need for not working in silos. Um, if I could lend a one word answer to your question on what the broad strategies can and should be, I would say that the answer would be ecosystem development. Okay, so everything else I can say will just be noise, but I think ultimately what we need to think about is ecosystem development. And as Suan had alluded to, it's exactly not about working in silos, but really reflecting on the word ecosystem and the etymology being home system. I think for us it's existential, and it's about working as comprehensively together as an ecosystem as possible. So let me expound on that a little bit, if I may. What do we mean by ecosystem development when it comes to technology development and technological advancements? I would say that ultimately the utility of a technology, or I would say that the technology is only as good as its ability to be utilized, i.e., we need to think about the absorptive capacity of some of these technologies that are coming out of our laboratories, right? So to that end, when we talk about the public sector's role, or for that matter, the IHLs, the Institutes of Higher Learning, or any public sector agency that's responsible for research, I think that the key strategy should not just be about the performance of research, but the development of an ecosystem, i.e., can we help increase the absorptive capacity in enterprises for the use of these technologies? Now, I think in order to do that, there needs to be a recognition that not all technologies or not all companies are created equal, right? I think you've got your large multinational corporations that may have ESG mandates, right, as part of their board committees, and they already have the incentive. They have already been set up to work towards the environment, sustainability, and that's part of their governance. So they will look at sustainability. Now the question is, beyond those companies, are we also able to look at a sustainable supply chain? I beg your pardon. What do I mean by a sustainable supply chain? I think that in addition to your large multinational corporations, are there also companies that we can uplift, local enterprises, right, regardless of where we are, startups that can eventually contribute towards the sustainability, not only of the large companies that we engage, but also the broader ecosystem and also to consumers. So I think ultimately, in my mind, that is the key thing, being able to develop the ecosystem. How are we doing it in Singapore? Again, to respond to Suan and the need to spend now, front load, I fully agree. So in the last couple of months, you may have seen in Singapore, A-Star has established a new research institute. It's called the Institute for Sustainability for Chemicals, Energy and Environment. The acronym is ISCE squared. And that's exactly what we're doing in terms of investing in research upfront, but again, not for the sake of performing research, but really to drive ecosystem development. What we want to do is ensure that we have partnerships with academia, public sector agencies, and critically industries to support Singapore's climate change goals, including the Singapore Green Plan, the Zero Waste Master Plan, and also support all the local energy, chemicals, and pharmaceutical sectors to make them more sustainable.
Thank you, Eugene, for that very extensive and all inclusive answer. And I think we've covered so much ground with what government agencies and research centers can do. We want to move on to talk about academia, and this one's for Erwin. Erwin, what can academia and research centers do to cultivate a resilient talent pipeline that has an interest in sustainability, especially with the global COVID-19 pandemic? How can we rethink and innovate in our sustainability efforts? Erwin, what are your thoughts?
Thank you, Win, for this wonderful conversation. I would like to thank also the other panelists for setting the ground for very insightful and enlightening contributions to what we can imagine for a sustainable world. We have created the SUTD Sustainability Plan, which is premised on the human-centric importance. And technology itself is not just technology, but actually related to the human being, for the human being. And at SUTD, we have created the internal plan whereby it has three components, which is the seeding of sustainability research, innovation, and enterprise. And then also the education for sustainable action, that it should be related to opportunities outside of the university. And then transforming our campus into an oasis, an open arena for sustainability, innovation, and solutions, so that the students, faculty, and the researchers would have opportunity to experiment and then do things in action. And then, of course, internally that happens. We cannot exist as a silo, and partnerships are very important. And so beyond SUTD, we build our partnerships to create a better world together, a happier, sustainable world. And one of these partnerships is actually the SUTD and Singh Health Research and Design Initiative. And it is together with Professor Selina and her team that we are developing the low carbon campus at Changi General Hospital and coming integrated health center at Bidok North. And then, of course, also there is the opportunity for a future health living laboratory, so a living laboratory for sustainable being and well-being studies. So I think the students have opportunity to actually explore what a healthy environment could be with the help of the team from CGH and Professor Selina's team. And then not only the young people, and then not only the research that happens within the university, but also maybe developing a continuing education program that involves people within CGH and then also within the community also. So I think that it expands the things we can do. So as Eugene was saying, it's developing the ecosystem for us to actually develop and create that sustainable world, not just dream about it, but actually put it into action and have this happier and sustainable world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erwin. It's just wonderful to see this ecosystem in action, cooperation and collaboration between government, academia, and of course, important sectors like healthcare as well. Now, we're just about to run out of time, and I'm just going to end off this discussion with one last question in 1 or 2 minutes. Can you tell us, this will be a question for all our panelists, how do you think we can make sustainability as a way of life? Sustainability as a way of life. What are your thoughts? How can we make it a way of life? We're going to start, first of all, with Selina. Selina, what are your thoughts? How can we make sustainability as a way of life, in your view?
Well, that's just coming straight off from Erwin's points that he mentioned earlier about our collaboration, right? One of the things that we are doing right now is actually coming out with a curriculum that every staff needs to go through. And I think we always start with education, and that's very important for us to ensure that we all have a level up our understanding about sustainability and what each and every one of us are responsible for and can do. And that will become very important because that will then help us to drive culture building and ensuring that all our initiatives we have in healthcare has sustainability targets in them. The second thing that we would like to also mention about is design. It's really important for us to think about how we do the supply chain, how we do the consumer habits and so on and so forth. It requires us to rethink and redesign, and therefore it is important for us as we start our journey in developing, for example, a greenfield site like the Eastern General Hospital at Bedok North, or a brownfield site like the Changi General Hospital. We can look at how we can improve the designs in healthcare, both in terms of the facilities, practices, and the people, in terms of achieving our sustainability goals. And then lastly, in terms of collaboration that we have with SUTD, we welcome everybody to also come on board and see how we can build a stronger and more resilient and more sustainable world together. Thank you.
That's wonderful. That's a great answer. And I want to find out the thoughts from Harjeet as well. How do you think we can make sustainability a way of life?
Yeah, thank you. And this is something that we should learn from the younger generation. So it should be asked to the audience. But I would say that one of the first things to sort of look at, and something that I look at, is what is my personal carbon footprint, right? What am I responsible for? And it's really interesting when you start to look at your own lifestyle as it stands today and start to analyze what is your personal carbon footprint. So interestingly, actually, right here, right at home, SP Power, SP Group actually has a personal footprint calculator that everyone can access. You can go in right now and take a look at it. And it estimates it would take about 400 rain trees to compensate for the carbon footprint of typical Singapore residents. You do a quick back of the envelope calculation that's approximately 2 billion rain trees is what's required to compensate. And clearly we don't have the landmass for that. And so you start to look at your individual carbon footprint based on your own lifestyle, whether you drive, whether you take public transport, how many business, personal trips do you do, and so on. Do you recycle at home? And it sort of gives you a very good idea that you probably are way beyond the current level. So I would say start with measuring what's your personal carbon footprint, and then hopefully with some incremental changes, you can make some lifestyle changes, including myself. We all have to do it. It's not about the other person. We've got to start ourselves in terms of looking at ways and means in which we could do that. So I would say start to first measure and then start to make incremental changes. And clearly recycle, reuse, reduce are terms that we are all very familiar with. And many of our younger generation are far better than us older folks in doing that. So I'm really glad that these younger generation are bringing on the change. But I think we all need to do a lot more to save the planet.
Thank you so much, Harjit. And we just got a few minutes left, but I still want to hear, before we end off, from Erwin as well as Eugene and Toon, starting with Erwin. What is one thing you think we need to do right now to make sustainability a way of life?
Thank you, Wayne. Sustainability is really not sustainable unless we have our behavioral change itself, unless we make it our everyday. So I think it's very important that, as shared previously, that we have to make that change within our lives, our everyday life. And so I think the changes in our behavior is very important. And then in the crafting of the SUTD sustainability plan, we actually look into a Japanese concept called shikake. It's actually a small trigger that actually helps create behavioral change. It's a device that helps us maybe in our design thinking to be more aware and conscious of the aspirations we have and the things that we do. And as while ago, it was also stated that maybe data is helpful, and the technology we have with AI, machine learning, is also very helpful in creating the simulations for us to imagine what could be possible. So I think that even the world of metaverse also could help us in this. So behavioral change, each of us is very important. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erwin. And Tun Suan, your thoughts on making sustainability a way of life? I'm sure you have quite a bit to tell us.
Um, a way of life, I think I strongly agree with Prof. Erwin, is all about behavioral change. All right, perhaps I will talk about in three level. I mean, as a personal level, I think Mr. Singh have talked a lot about your own carbon footprint, how you measure it. I want to move on to the educational level, especially for the young. Okay, I involve some of the so-called CDC level activity where school are taking on this role and imparting on knowledge about what is climate change, what is sustainability in a very simple way to the student, like use less electricity, save water, and all this behavior need to be cultivated from very young. Then the next one, very quickly, of course, we look at the industry. Well, we have a question about which industry having some industry have very high carbon footprint. What are they going to do about it? Or are they just in for the money? Or in their CSR statement, they are also addressing climate change, things like that. So is behavior across from individual into the society and into the industry.
Thank you so much, Tun Suan. And to round things off, I'd like to invite Eugene. Can you add on or expand, or maybe add something new to what the rest have already said about making sustainability a way of life?
Well, thank you, Wayne. And if I have the final word on it, I guess I would try to encapsulate what everyone has said in the following words. Because it's an existential crisis, I think we need to think global, but start local and start immediately. And so if I just may expound on some of the things that some of my colleagues have talked about. Harjeet talked about hydrogenization. I think we need to think about the entire ecosystem. It's not just about the infrastructure, it's also about the storage, it's the transportation. Everything needs to be thought about holistically. And that's why we need to think at the broadest possible level. And I would say, as far as individuals being educated are concerned, I fully agree with all my panelists. That's absolutely essential. But to do a little bit more, I think we don't only need to educate individuals, we also need to educate organizations. So if I may be absolutely shameless in my pitch of A-Star's Green Compass program, we work together with JTC as well as TUFSUT to come up with a program that really allows companies to learn, assess, prioritize, and plan for sustainability. So I encourage all companies out there to look it up and perhaps join us in the public service to look holistically at how we can be more sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eugene. And that brings to an end our insightful discussion about how research, innovation, and smart technologies can contribute to building a resilient and sustainable future. And I think there are just so many golden nuggets that our panelists have shared. And I look forward to how our audience will be acting on these takeaways in the future. Once again, thank you so much to our panelists for joining us for this discussion.